Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And you know that today we have a lot of changes on the ground, and this is very important because the Russians managed to improve their positions along the entire line of combat contact. And today is the 17th of April, and according to, let's say, talks and agreement between the President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin and the President of the United States of America Donald Trump, the ceasefire on the energy facilities ends. So this ceasefire ends today, and the Russians currently, according to this agreement, most likely have possibility or has this, how to say, military or war right to continue attacks on Ukrainian objects. Anyway, as for now, the Russians haven't started using this right. Maybe they will not do this. It's very interesting, and we'll see what is going to be next. But now let's return back to the line of combat contact, and let's talk about these significant changes on the ground. And first we're going to discuss the situation in the Sumy direction, where the Russians continue a battle for the settlement of Garnal. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have colored the church. The territory of the church, this complex, was colored by the Russians this night, because the Russians, according to different reports, managed to establish complete control over this territory. So let's discuss this in details. We have several geolocations, and this is the first video that was published this morning. In this video we can see how the Russian soldier was holding a Russian flag, let's say, somewhere around this building. The building, of course, was geolocated immediately. This is the flag. It's very difficult to recognize a Russian soldier in this area, but he is there. He is there, and he is, let's say, holding, let's say, a sign, not the Russian flag, but this is a sign of the unit that was probably responsible for offensive operation in this direction. So this building was geolocated, and this is exactly the place where the Russian soldier was, let's say, holding in his hand a sign of, let's say, the unit that was responsible for offensive operation, at least from this direction. Also, at the same time, we got another video, and this is another video, but as you can see, from the southeastern part of this complex. And here we can see the same story, a building. This is the building once again, and we can see the Russian soldier somewhere around the building. This is it. This is the Russian soldier, and he was also this time waving just with his hand. There are no Russian flag. There is no Russian flag in his hands, just his hands, and that's it. So based on these two videos, we have adjusted the map, and we have colored the territory between the southern part of the settlement of Gueva and the East Church itself. Furthermore, several pro-Russian resources confirmed that this territory was taken by the Russians. For example, during the previous 12 hours, this information was confirmed by neutral mappers. According to them, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to secure this territory completely. As for the pro-Russian resources, they published several articles about the situation, because you know that this video, as we discussed in the previous video, was published by the Russian sources on the late evening of the 16th of April of 2025, so probably 12 or even more hours ago. And yesterday in the evening, a lot of sources already reported that the Russians managed to secure the territory of Church. So that is why somewhere around 11 p.m. of the Russian time, the group of forces north made their own official statement regarding the situation of the territory of this complex. And according to them, as of 11 p.m. of, let's say, Russian time, there were still very heavy clashes. There were still very heavy clashes, and that was too early to make any statements regarding complete control over this territory yesterday at 11 p.m. But today we received lots of additional icons, and most likely the Russians managed to secure this territory completely. Also, we had lots of reports that several groups of the armored force of Ukraine managed to cross the river of Psol and to retreat in the southern direction. Several groups were trying to retreat and to break through the encirclement and to retreat in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Garnal, but the Russians are saying that a lot of Ukrainian soldiers were encircled. Not just encircled, it's not the correct word. According to the Russians, if you remember, several days ago, the Russians began bombing and attacking the territory of this church with a significant number of FAB and Iskander missiles. And the Russians are saying that as a result of those Iskander strikes, lots of basements, lots of underground facilities were basically destroyed. And the Russians are saying that due to destruction of several, let's say, important corridors and several important lines, lots of Ukrainians basically were trapped by the Russians. So there are still still lots of Ukrainians underground who currently don't have any possibilities to get on the surface of this, let's say, complex. So this is the situation. So basically, some Ukrainians managed to retreat. Some Ukrainians, of course, were destroyed during the battle for this, let's say, complex, and some Ukrainians were captured and trapped by the ruins, let's say, below the surface in the, let's say, underground facilities. So this is the situation in this area, and furthermore, this morning we have already received a lot of reports that the Russians answered the village of Garnal itself, and as for the, let's say, morning of the 17th of April of 2025, there are already very heavy clashes on the territory of this village. So we believe that very likely that by the end of this weekend, the Russians will be able to establish complete control over both the settlement of Garnal and the settlement of Oleshnya, and then the Russians will continue further in the southwestern direction with the purpose to take controls over some territories, towns and cities on the territory of Sumy region. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupiansk direction, or the Liman direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. As you can see, during the previous night we received a lots of icons from this area as well, and a lots of sources, mainly pro-Ukrainian sources and pro-Russian sources, and the neutral resources reported that during the previous nights the Russians managed to improve their positions. Let's compare the map first of all. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 16th of April of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 17th of April. So according to several sources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to secure completely the southern part of the settlement by the name of Nova. So this small block was taken by the Russians and secured, which means that the battle are about to start for the central part of this settlement. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the eastern outskirts of the settlement by the name of Novomikhailivka. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 16th of April, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 17th of April. The Russians took under control this forest. Furthermore, the Russians managed to maintain the lines between the settlement of Novomikhailivka and Makeivka by taking under control these huge territories. This is the situation by the end of the 16th of April, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 17th of April. As you can see, lots of fields were taken by the Russians, but also we believe that Ukrainians realized that there were very high risk of being encircled by the Russians, and we believe that the Ukrainians, to avoid this situation, decided to fall back further in the northwestern direction towards more reliable positions. So we see that the flower of Liman is blooming, is continue blooming, and most likely during the next days we are going to receive more and more updates from this territory. The Russians are tightening the news around the positions of the 3rd Azov Brigade and many other forces on this direction, and the Russians continue their offensive operation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Constantinovka direction, because during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, we also received lots of videos and lots of geolocations that changes the situation completely on the ground. And first, let's talk about the area of Russian offensive operation. If you remember, several days ago, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt along TO 516 road in the direction of the settlement by the name of Nilipovka, and as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to cut the Ukrainians on the territory of mine from the mainland. And that was very important, because right after that, the Russians began offensive operation on the direction of the mine with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory. And clashes, the fierce clashes for this mine have been taking place for the previous 5 or 6 days, and we didn't know, and we haven't been receiving anything regarding the situation there, and we don't know, and we didn't know yesterday what was happening there. But today, by the morning of the 17th of April of 2025, we got the first geolocation from this area that confirms that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, indeed managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and answer the territory of the mine itself. Today, the Ukrainian sources published this video, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were actively droning the Russians, not just on the territory of mine, but almost everywhere. And I would like to point your attention to this episode. And this is exactly the moment when the Ukrainians attacked the Russians on the territory of the mine. So this video, this episode and this place was geolocated. I would like to point your attention on these facilities. And if we return back to map, this is exactly the area that the Ukrainians attacked. And based on this video, we came to the conclusion that the Russians established complete control control, at least over the southern part of mine. Currently, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to answer the central part or the northern part, but obviously the first step in this process has been done by the Russians. Furthermore, different mappers confirmed this information. Pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian and neutral mappers reported that indeed the Russians managed to establish control over this territory. Furthermore, neutral mappers confirmed that Ukrainians still control the mine itself. So we see that currently the situation is that the Russians control around 20% of this facility and Ukrainians control around 80%, at least by the morning of the 17th of April. Maybe by the time I start making this video, or by the time you're gonna watch this video, the situation would be completely different and the Russians will secure the territory of this facility completely. Anyway, we see that the Russians continue their offensive operation, and today we got another video, and in this video we could see how the Ukrainians also attacked the Russians in the vicinity of this mine. Based on this video, we have also adjusted the map in the Russian favor. We have colored the contested area under complete Russian control. Furthermore, and at the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation along the railways and in these pockets along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. We have lots of videos. The Russians published, for example, this video where we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine with TOS flamethrower systems, and obviously this is something like artillery preparation before another major offensive operation in this area. We see that currently the Russians are preparing the foothold, are preparing this direction before offensive operation, but most likely this upcoming day the Russians will begin this attack. Furthermore, we have lots of videos that the Russians managed to capture lots of Ukrainians in these fields between the settlement of Druzhba and the settlement of Liberated. So we see that Ukrainians managed to control and to hold the Russians for around 5 or 6 days since the beginning of the Russian breakthrough. But now we see that most likely the resources of Ukrainian defense are coming to an end, and most likely during the next several days we're gonna adjust this part of the map significantly. Now let's move further and let's talk about the southern Constantinovka direction or the Kliban-Bytska direction. According to information we have, the Russians managed to establish complete control over these territories, and as we can see we have lots of icons that confirm this. First of all, I'll remind you that yesterday the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the group of forces south managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kalinova. And today the Russian sources published this video, and in this video we can see how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions. In this video we can see the presence of the Russian units on the territory of the settlement. We can see how the clashes were taking place for this territory, and in this video, the most important, we can see several Russian soldiers that raised their flags on the territory of this settlement. So based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything because we adjusted this let's say part of the map in the Russian favor yesterday, but today we got additional confirmation of Russian control over this territory. Furthermore, we have adjusted the map in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Valentynivka, and Valentynivka itself was colored in the Russian favor. So this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 16th of April of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 17th of April of 2025. Today we got this video where we can see two Russian soldiers that were waving with the flags of the units and that were responsible for offensive operation in this direction, and we can see another Russian soldier with the Russian flag. So this place was geolocated. This episode took place exactly in this point, and based on this video we have adjusted the map in the Russian favor completely, and we believe that today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will also confirm this information. They will also tell us that the Russians managed to secure this territory. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and now the Russians managed to block the settlement of Sukhaya Balka from the west, and the Russians continue advancing further in the northern direction. So once again, as I told you before, the Ukrainian defense in this area collapsed completely. The Ukrainians can't stabilize the situation, and there is just one line where the Ukrainians more or less, let's say, reliable line where the Ukrainians can show more or less reliable resistance. We're talking about the line between the settlements of Alexandropol, Zarya and Romanovka. So most likely this is exactly the line where the Ukrainians will try to slow down the Russians, because if the Ukrainians are not able to stop the Russians between the three settlements, then most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back towards the settlement of Stepanovka, because Yablunovka, Alexandra, Kalinova, these two villages also would be taken by the Russians, because there are no strongholds in the south or in the east to these two settlements, which means that there are no basic defenses that can slow down the Russians during their major offensive operation that is currently taking place. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern direction, South Donetsk direction and the Novopavlovka direction. Today we got a very important video that was published from the settlement by the name of Dneproenergiya. I'll remind you that several days ago the pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Dneproenergiya, and this information was also confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources like Deep State. But today the Russians published this video where we can see two Russian soldiers that established the Russian flag almost in the most northern part of the settlement. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. We have colored basically the contested area back again under complete Russian control. So now we have no doubts that the Russians control this territory, that the Russians furthermore have strong control over this territory. Furthermore, the Russians continue offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Bogatyr. Lots of vehicles were destroyed by the Russians during the previous night. The Russians, as you can see, established some mines, some, let's say, barriers, some traps for the Ukrainians that try to evacuate their servicemen from the territory of Constantinople and from strongholds in the fields. The Russians control the situation and the Russians destroy everything they see. So this is the situation in this direction. We expect from day to day the beginning of the clashes for the settlement of Bogatyr. As for the Shevchenko direction, we haven't received anything. We don't, as you can see, no changes on the ground, which means that indeed the Russians suffered losses during their last offensive operation in this area. Now the Russians are regrouping, trying to concentrate additional forces around the perimeter of the village of Shevchenko, and most likely during the next several days the Russians will make another attempt to attack this territory. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.